Yeah, I agree. I've seen some arguments for Owen Daniels because, obviously Julius Thomas is no longer there. And they're like, oh, red zone threat. But he's never really been a red zone threat. So I don't really know, how Denver's going to use Owen Daniels. I think he'll definitely have a decent season, but I just don't know if I'm willing to pay for him week 1.
No, I'm not.
All right, and then, of course, pretty much after that, these guys are pretty much the same guys. Are there any guys in here that have great matchups or some high upside guys that you might want to plug into like a GPP lineup?
Yeah, there's a couple that you could make an argument for. Kyle Rudolph, he was, after an injury-plagued year last year, he was good the year before. The Vikings are a much better team. Bridgewater targeted him pretty heavily in the preseason when they played together. 5,300 against the San Francisco 49ers defense that, a shell of what they were. He comes through. He's a decent red zone target, but he's really boom or bust.
Yeah, he definitely just he needs a score basically to reach value. I don't think he's going to get the number of targets between the 20s. I think he's basically a red zone target. He gets 2 touchdowns, you're good, but otherwise I think he's a bit risky.
And if you want to completely punt the position, I would say Richard Rodgers is somebody to look at for Green Bay. He's taken over the starting job, and again, with Jordy Nelson going out, there should be a few more targets out there. He's in the same boat as Rudolph. He's completely boom or bust, but he could easily catch a touchdown and go for a few yards and hit value.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I actually have Tyler Eifert as well as one of those punts that, he could potentially, if he's healthy, be the second leading receiver on the Bengals, but his problem is he can never stay healthy. What do you think of Eifert?
Eifert's not a bad play. I mean, I think Oakland is going to be a little better this year, but they're still not going to be an outstanding defense. I don't 100% want to trust Dalton, but he's not a bad play at this price. Surprisingly, Oakland, though, was pretty good against the tight end. They were ranked 10th in the league, so you might want to take that into consideration.
That's a good call, actually. I actually hadn't looked at that, so that may actually change my mind on that. All right, so we're actually going to skip kicker, unless you had anything you wanted to say about kicker, the kicking position.
Yeah, I mean, kicker can make or break your lineup, to be honest with you, because, a few points here and there can mean the difference between cashing and not cashing, or hitting big and not hitting big. And just to touch on it briefly, I have 4 blocks that I check for kickers. And that's high over under, expected to win, playing at home, and playing in the dome. And a kicker that hits all 4 of those is probably going to be my kicker for the week. And the only one that really hits all of those is Dan Bailey from Dallas. I also think Cody Parkey is a good pick, and if you want to save some money, McManus from Denver is a big pick. Even though he's kicking outdoors, I think the bump that he gets from playing in that thin air helps him a lot.
Yeah, I agree definitely on that one. The only thing I ever had to say about kicker is at least season long that I look at, and it's not really a factor this time of year, is weather. People tend to not look at weather for the NFL games because the games get played no matter what, but you don't want to own a kicker that's in swirling winds or any kind of rain or snow or anything basically that can impede upon their accuracy.
Yeah, that's a really good overall point too. Because one thing I always do Sunday morning is check the weather forecast in all the cities. And if they're expecting very high winds or downpours or that kind of thing, I kind of look at especially the passing game players and the kickers. I might want to pivot to somebody else. I remember it's been 3 or 4 years ago, but Pittsburgh played at Miami. It was basically a monsoon, and every play was just a plunge into the line, and the game ended up, I think, 6-3.
Yeah, I actually remember that game.
From that passing game, you were done.
Yeah, I think that was the game where there was a punt, and there was no one back to receive the punt, and the ball just stuck right in the mud.
Yeah, it was like a golf shot.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we're going to just move on to defenses here. Defenses are kind of a funny thing. So the top tier, we've got the Seahawks, the Panthers, the Dolphins, and they have the 49ers here, but as a fan, I can tell you that they should not be in the top tier. The think they're there based on reputation. I don't really know what they were thinking. I don't know if these prices came out before the Alden Smith before they cut Alden Smith, but really it's Seahawks, Panthers, Dolphins are your top tier, at least by price point. Any of those defenses worth paying up for?
I don't really like any of those a lot, other than maybe Seattle. Seattle's one of those better defenses on the field than they are for fantasy purposes. Because if you're really going to rack up fantasy points with the defense, they have to have a lot of turnovers, a lot of sacks, and touchdowns. And Seattle keeps teams to a pretty low score, but they don't get a lot of defensive touchdowns, so they don't score those huge fantasy points. So, yeah, I wouldn't talk anybody out of Seattle, but...
Yeah, I'm with you on Seattle. I know, like, in season long, they're typically the first defense off the board. But even last year, they're the first defense off the board, and I think they ended up, like, 22nd overall. And I just... they're a good defense, and they get hyped up, but you're right, they don't, they don't get the sacks and the turnovers that some other defenses do.
Miami's not a bad target against Washington. They would have been much better if RG3 were playing, but Cousins can throw 3 or 4 interceptions in a game and then start sulking, and the wheels completely come off. So they're not a terrible target at 4,700.
Yeah, I think I have the Dolphins as one of my top plays, just because of that reason. Because Cousins has been known to be a turnover machine. I think Washington wants to lean on their running game, but I think with Sue being there, I think it's going to be a difficult thing to do. The Dolphins have what I think is one of the more underrated corners in Brent Grimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think the Dolphins could definitely be a good play here. But kind of the same thing you said with Seattle. I think the Dolphins might be a better team in real life NFL than they are like on in fantasy, because I don't believe they had a lot of sacks and turnovers last year. I could be mistaken on that, but I think I had Dolphins as one of my top plays. Moving into the second tier here, we've got the Bengals, we got the Browns, we got the Texans, Bucks. Any of these guys you like in this middle tier here?
The Bucks and the Titans are both decent plays because they're both facing rookie quarterbacks. They play each other, and rookie quarterbacks are always a good thing to target when you're picking your defense. They tend to turn the ball over a little more. They tend to hold the ball longer, leading to more sacks. I think the Titans are probably the better of the two because Jameis Winston can be a turnover machine. If you look at last year in college, he threw a ton of interceptions. He's throwing 2 in the preseason and looked really shaky at times. I think the Titans are a pretty good defense out of that bunch, even though statistically they weren't that great last year.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the Jameis Winston call as far as being compared to Mariota. I think Mariota, his whole thing was sort of ball control, short controlled passes, safe passes, whereas Winston, he has the big arm. He's trying to force things in where he shouldn't be forcing things in, and definitely is prone to throwing some interceptions.
Agreed.
All right, so we're moving on down here. Now, granted, in defenses, they're not a huge difference when you get down here. You're talking like $100 here and there. But are there any defenses that are, kind of below that range that you're looking at that you think could potentially be a good play?
I like the Jets a lot. They're playing at home, and defenses tend to do better when they're playing at home. I'm not 100% sure why that is, but I know it is. They're playing against Cleveland, which arguably has the least talent at any skill position of any team in the NFL. McCown can turn the ball over, 3 or 4 times a game. They've improved themselves in the secondary incredibly with Rivas and Cromartie. They already had a real tough front 7, so they can really get after him. So I think the Jets are a really good play at 4,400 on FanDuel.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think in an article I wrote, the Jets have 2 of the better cornerbacks in the league going up against the Browns, who probably have one of the worst receiving cores in the entire league. So it's just, I couldn't believe it when I looked up their depth chart, and I was like, well, who's going to start on this team? There's just nobody there. It's like Dwayne Bowe and Andrew Hawkins, and it's just ugly. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you on the Jets.
And McCown got benched last year in Tampa Bay, so I don't know what the answer in Cleveland is. It's not Matt Bell. So, things could get really bad for the Browns in this one.
I agree. Now, there is one that I hadn't really considered, and I was listening to a podcast myself this morning on the way to work, and someone brought this up and just wanted to run it by you and tell me what you thought. What about the Jacksonville Jaguars? They weren't an awful defense last year. They weren't great, obviously, middle of the pack. But you got Cam Newton and Greg Olsen and a whole bunch of nobodies. And Jacksonville, I believe, was 6th or 7th last year in total sacks. You have any interest in something like that?
That's actually pretty interesting. I haven't considered them, but they were. I mean, the problem last year was their offense. It wasn't the defense. And, yeah, Carolina without Benjamin, they're going to be in trouble. They're playing at home, and Carolina did make the playoffs, but they were 7-8-1. Yeah, that's a real interesting team to target. I'm going to look into that a lot more.
All right, good deal. All right, well, that pretty much wraps everything up. I want to thank you for being on the show today. Is there anything you wanted to leave us with, sort of like a little parting knowledge as far as for some of these newbies out there that are going to be starting in week 1, their first game, besides what you've already mentioned?
I think we hit on most of it, but if you're going to play any kind of serious money, do the research. Don't just pick players. Spend some time, get with people who know what they're doing. And even if you're just going to play a few dollars, you want to win. So, spend a little time with it, get used to it, and also realize that even the pros, the guys that spend, that $500,000 a weekend, are going to have losing weeks. So don't get too discouraged if you lose. Don't bet too much. Don't bet more than you can afford, and have fun with it.
All right, and that's a perfect plug for those of you that, they're going to be starting, doing some research here. A good place to find some of that research, of course, is goingfor2.com. Dennis writes for the site. He's got his battle analysis up there. I'll be doing that weekly, so definitely check that out. With that said, let's go ahead and wrap things up. I'd like to thank Dennis for coming on the show, and you could follow him, like I said, on Twitter at Infantry Boys. That's INFANTRY, Boys, BOYS. So definitely give him a follow, and check out goingfor2.com. Thank you.